Salutations, ladies and gentlemen, the Knife Raven here, back again with another video, and in today's video, I suppose this could be considered a bit of a Fixed Blade Friday, as what I have before me is a piece from Tamer. Now, this is I don't know if I'd call it a company, but a maker that I've been shining a bit more light on lately. Now, as I've said before, these are quite elusive. They are made in Turkey by hand, and they're sold here in Canada, in the province of Alberta. So you will have trouble finding these unless there's a place that I am unaware of. But for the most part, these are unfortunately knives that I'm just showcasing, less trying to offer as a means of whether or not you should buy them. Of course, by all means, if you are capable of doing so, then they're well worth it. But this is a fixed blade from Tamer, and I got this one a little under a year ago. I've been thinking of doing a video on it. It's a very unique type of fixed blade. Of course, it comes in a hand-stitched leather sheath with a belt loop and a clasp. Very easy to get at the knife. And this is going to be somewhat of a shocker for those who are used to the more typical skinning knives and hunting knives. And this is why. What we have here is, wipe some of the oil off, a very, very impressive triangular dagger-style blade. Now that is just scary, to put it simply. We have a double-edged, yes, both sides are sharpened here. We have a space in the middle, and I'm unsure of whether or not this has any form of practical use, or if it's just simply for the style of it, but by all means, I quite like it. Of course, have our stamp of Tamer. This is a Full-tang knife, single piece of steel. If my memory serves me correctly, this is 4116 German stainless, so by all means a decent steel for a knife that really, granted, could be very well used as a hunting knife. To me, I purchased more as a collector's piece. But you have brass bolsters here, which, as you can see, are fixed with 2 pins. It was shinier originally, but brass, of course, will tarnish and gain a bit of a patina. We have, for the handles, which are very interestingly shaped, this is ram's horn, as confirmed by Mr. Tamer. And again, with ram's horn, you're probably used to seeing a coloration more like this, and I know, again, the almost patented description from Slick Slicers, of course, is buttery translucence. This is not as translucent and not as buttery, but it's very, very nice. There's a nice pattern in it, and it's fixed with these 3 large pins or rivets. This side, almost a bit more like buffalo or ox horn, takes on a dark green color, but then almost merges into black. Have a streak of white here. And then, like night and day, we have the other side, which is this very light green bordering on yellow. But just a delightful handle. I know that this might bother some who appreciate a handle, or a set of handles, I should say, that are mirrored, but in this case, I appreciate the difference. As for the knife itself, it's definitely large enough to gain a full 4-finger grip. You can hold it in the typical fencing or saber grip. We also just have the traditional grip here. I suppose if it interests you, you have the backhand grip. And really, any way you want to hold this, you likely can. If you can hold a fixed blade in any position, you can probably do the same for this. I will say, though, that the handle, based on its shape, does have this extended bit, which, as you can see, goes past the tang of the knife. And it's by no means uncomfortable, but it is worth mentioning. It does offer a bit of extra length for those with larger hands. The blade came very, very sharp. Again, this hasn't been used, so it still remains just as sharp as when it was new. The tip is scary, again, as I said. This is very much a fine point, but being a bit of a conversion from both sides down to the center, it will be quite reinforced overall. The blade stock isn't terribly thick, but it's by no means flimsy. There's a tiny, tiny little bit of flex, but this is still a very, very stable blade. Also note, we have a bit of a mirror polish for the central part of the blade, but the actual grind itself is done in a more satin-like finish, which mirrors that of the handle. Again, if you want a measurement here, this is a large knife coming in at an overall length of just a little bit under 11 inches overall. Your blade length is sitting at 5.5, with the cutting edge being 5.25. So definitely a large knife, by all means. Now, how is the craftsmanship on this piece? I will definitely say it is not perfect by any means. In fact, you may have already been able to see. And remember, this is partially due to the fact, I'm guessing, that materials such as horn and bone will frequently swell and shrink depending on the temperature. You can see that the lineup between the bolster and the handle, there is a pretty significant gap. And you can see that from the top as well. Now, you can't really feel it. It's actually very smooth. But in terms of there actually being a gap, yes, you can see there is gapping on this side. It's a little bit more dipped below, so you can feel that the bolster does sit a little bit higher than the cover. If my camera, there we are. But there is still a little bit of a gap there, as you can see. But my main complaint, if I were to give one, would probably come from the pins. This one, very smooth. This one, or rather, this side, not so much. You can see it's raised a little. This one, very smooth. And that one's raised. Smooth, and ever so slightly raised. It seems that on each side, the pins that are, or rivets I should say, that are flat, jut out just a little bit on the other side. Now, again, this is by no means going to ruin the knife. You still have a perfectly good grip on it. These aren't going to be falling out on you or anything like that. It's still very secure. But, again, I am a fairly, I suppose I should say, picky reviewer with somewhat unrealistically high standards for a knife. And whether you want to declare this unrealistic or not, that's up to you. But in terms of cosmetic value, yes, the rivets are raised in some aspects, and the transition between the bolster and the cover is not perfect. But for a user, I would declare this almost flawless. And I say almost because of one thing. Now, this isn't the fault of how the knife was made, but rather a fault with the design, in my eyes. You can see that where the tang ends, there is this spot here where it's just the horn jutting out a little further. And while I appreciate this shape, and I think that it looks very nice, I will possibly mention that because horn is not the strongest material, you're going to have a bit more of a likelihood that there could be cracks if you drop it than, say, ebony or some form of composite. Now, by all means, it makes for a very attractive handle, but in terms of how breakable it is, there is a problem there. Now, I'm not saying that there is any danger of there being a break here, but chances are, if this had been cut off where the last part of the steel ends, it would have made for less of a likelihood that something could break. Again, nothing has happened in terms of breakage on this knife, but I am just a little bit concerned about that part. Maybe I'm wrong, maybe I'm clueless, maybe both, but in terms of the design, that is something to keep in mind if you are going to use this in an environment where it could be damaged. But again, horn being horn, you can see, for the most part, it's very, very well done. There is a tiny crack here that runs the top part of this side. But again, it doesn't seem to go particularly deep, so I'm optimistic that nothing will come of that. But overall, this is a very, very unique knife. I think if I had to say if there was one fixed blade that is more unique than any other in my collection, it may very well be this piece right here, as it definitely does look like, again, I don't buy knives for this purpose, and I don't condone this, but it definitely looks like it's a stabbing weapon. Now, again, as I've said before, for legal reasons and such, no, don't go out and buy a knife with that purpose in mind. But even so, I can appreciate the level of quality and certainly design that was put into this. Again, that blade is scary sharp, both on the sharpened edges plural, I should say, and also with the tip. I'm very, very impressed with this shape, and again, I think for what it is, it does an excellent job. I wouldn't really complain too much about the knife's craftsmanship. I think overall it's comfortable, it feels nice in the hand, and it's fairly balanced, fairly ergonomic, and somewhat symmetrical as well. Looks good, but again, still could have a bit of concern with the horn and possible breaks. And then if you want to be really picky, the pins aren't perfectly flush. But aside from that, this is a very nice knife, and I, again, will give the benefit of the doubt, considering this was made around a year ago, if not even further back. So since then, the quality that I've seen from this maker on a few knives I purchased a couple months ago, much, much better than originally they were. So there's a good chance if you happen to see one of these anywhere, and it's a recently made one, the quality might be considerably higher than what you're seeing here, because again, the brand as a whole, again, company brand maker, has improved drastically since the time that I purchased this. So there's a very good chance this is the metaphorical pre-Harrison Wright knife. And then there, of course, Arthur Wrights after the Harrisons took over. This might be a similar example of this was then, but now the knives are significantly better in terms of overall quality. But regardless, this is a very nice knife. I believe this cost around 70 Canadian, 70 or 80. And for a fixed blade of this size, using natural horn, and coming with a stitched leather sheath, I think that that's very much reasonable. Again, you could be nitpicky and complain about the transitions here and how the rivets stick up. But for me, and again, I'm not going to be using this, this is a knife I'm very happy with, and one that I thought would make for a fun little video. So, thank you very much for watching. This has been the Double-Edged Dagger by J. Tamer, and this is the Knife Raven. As always, signing off. Goodbye.